Before DeLong, before Friedman, before Vallée, before Hynek, and even before the term UFO existed, there was Major Donald E. Keyhoe, America's first mainstream ufologist. In a time when trust in government was at an all-time high, and going against the grain of popular culture was met with severe ostracization, Donald Keyhoe had the courage to investigate and publicly speak out about the UFO phenomena. A Marine aviator who would eventually earn the rank of Major, he used his connections within the military and government to piece together a glimpse into the UFO phenomena and the U.S. government's contrasting public and private stances on the subject. Donald Keyhoe is widely credited with being the first to suggest that there was an active cover-up by the U.S. government regarding the UFO subject, and he would discuss this publicly. Through his books and television and radio appearances, many Americans were exposed to the UFO phenomena for the first time. Donald Keyhoe would also go on to found one of the world's leading civilian UFO research organizations, NICAP, and he would spend the rest of his life researching the phenomena. So who is Donald Keyhoe? What did the early days of ufology look like? What did he write about? And what was the legacy that he would leave in a field that he helped create? Let's find out and take a closer look at Major Donald E. Keyhoe.
Half-wits, cranks, publicity hounds, fanatics in general, and screwballs, end quote. How do you feel about Mr. Considine's charge?
Well, I know where he got the story. He got it from Colonel Watson out at the Air Technical Intelligence Center in Dayton. In fact, the colonel went even a little farther, and he said behind every sighting was an idiot, a crackpot, a religious fanatic. That included a lot of high-ranking Air Force pilots, incidentally, and many airline captains, people who were qualified to see these things. But he was just following out an Air Force policy.
Donald Edward Keyhoe was born on June 20th, 1897, in Ottumwa, Ohio, 6 years before the Wright brothers would make their first flight. As a child, young Donald would often watch hot air balloons and early planes fly, and this is where he would develop his desire to become a pilot. A hard worker, he was admitted into the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, where he would meet many other young patriots passionate about serving their country. In 1920, he graduated with a BS degree and the commission of a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. The young lieutenant would fulfill his dreams and become a naval aviator, piloting both balloons and airplanes for the U.S. Navy. Lieutenant Keyhoe commanded a flight of naval seaplanes being ferried from the U.S. to Guam, and he was stationed on that island. In 1922, he crashed his plane during a nighttime flight, and his arm was severely injured. Donald's injuries led him to retire from the military, and during this time, he took up writing as a hobby. He wrote many short fiction stories for pulp magazines of the 1920s, but still kept up his keen interest in aviation. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh became the first person to make a single manned flight across the Atlantic Ocean, flying from New York to Paris. Charles Lindbergh became an instant celebrity in American society, and Donald Keyhoe would become the manager for Lindbergh's cross-country tour. Charles Lindbergh became one of the world's largest promoters of aviation, and Donald's position as manager of his cross-country tour allowed him to meet and mingle with many of aviation's top minds and businessmen. Donald Keyhoe wrote the book Flying with Lindbergh in 1928 about his experiences along the tour, and it became an instant hit with the American public. During the 1930s and early 1940s, Keyhoe wrote fictional aviation adventure stories for then popular pulp magazines, inventing the heroic flyers Phil Strange and Dick Knight, among other heroes and villains. He also contributed numerous factual articles to major magazines of the day on a wide range of topics, many popularizing aviation. The magazines included the Saturday Evening Post, Cosmopolitan, American, Red Book, and True. Other articles and features appeared in the Sunday newspaper supplements This Week and American Weekly. As war loomed in Europe, Keyhoe published M-Day, If War Comes, What Your Government Plans for You, dealing with U.S. mobilization for warfare. Once World War II broke out, Keyhoe was recalled to active duty with the rank of major and served in the Pentagon in the Naval Aviation Training Division. After the war, he again retired to private life and resumed his writing career. In 1947, the Kenneth Arnold UFO incident occurred and would change Donald Keyhoe's life forever. On June 24, 1947, while flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state, Kenneth Arnold claimed to have seen 9 unusual objects flying in the skies at high speeds. This event would be America's first mainstream UFO story, capturing the imagination of the American public and giving rise to the term flying saucer. Donald Keyhoe would follow the subject with some interest initially, but was largely skeptical of the whole story. During this time, Donald Keyhoe was working for True magazine as a writer, and he was tasked by his editor to investigate the saucer stories. Donald Keyhoe investigated the phenomena and had access to many friends and contacts within the military and Pentagon that other authors on the subject did not. After some investigation, Keyhoe became convinced that the flying saucers were real, as their forms, flight maneuvers, speeds, and light technology was far ahead of any nation's development. Keyhoe became convinced that they must be the products of unearthly intelligence, and that the U.S. government was trying to suppress the whole truth about the subject. This conclusion was based especially on the response Keyhoe found when he quizzed various officials about flying saucers. He was told that there was nothing to the subject, yet was simultaneously denied access to saucer-related documents. Keyhoe's article, Flying Saucers Are Real, appeared in the January 1950 issue of True, and caused a sensation. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, the first head of Project Blue Book, reported that among magazine publishers, that Donald Keyhoe's article in True was one of the most widely read and widely discussed magazine articles in history. Capitalizing on the interest, Keyhoe expanded the article into a book, The Flying Saucers Are Real, in 1950, and it sold over 500,000 copies. He argued that the Air Force knew that flying saucers were extraterrestrial, but downplayed the reports to avoid public panic. One of the UFO cases he highlighted was the Mantell UFO incident, which occurred in 1948. On January 7, 1948, 25-year-old Captain Thomas F. Mantell, a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot, died in a crash of his P-51 Mustang fighter after being sent in pursuit of an unidentified flying object. Various military witnesses claimed to have seen the large bright white object that Mantell was tasked with pursuing. The official government story was that Mantell was chasing a new experimental weather balloon, where he lost track of his oxygen levels and passed out, ultimately crashing his plane and dying. Donald Keyhoe would note that Mantell was an experienced pilot. His flight history consisted of 2,000 hours in the air, and he had been honored for his part in the Battle of Normandy during World War II. Keyhoe argued that Mantell would have known if this was just a weather balloon, and he definitely would have known to keep an eye on his oxygen levels while flying. Keyhoe also noted that UFO observations suddenly increased in 1947, following the series of A-bomb explosions in 1945. This is a common theme seen in UFOs, that they are interested in our nuclear weapons. By the mid-1950s, Keyhoe would dedicate his life to the pursuit of truth regarding the UFO phenomena. He would write the book, Flying Saucers from Outer Space, in 1953, and the book, The Flying Saucer Conspiracy, in 1955, both going into greater detail about UFO case studies and the government's contrasting private and public stances on the matter. During this time, Donald Keyhoe would begin making his first radio and television appearances to discuss the phenomena, including The Betty White Show. Yes, that Betty White. In 1956, Donald helped create the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP. NICAP would become the largest and most respected civilian UFO research group in the country. NICAP advocated transparent scientific investigations of UFO sightings and for congressional hearings. Project Blue Book investigator Dr. J. Allen Hynek would later say that NICAP was one of the best UFO research groups, consisting largely of sober, serious-minded people capable of valuable contributions to the UFO subject. Apart from Donald Keyhoe, who was a respected major in the military, NICAP had other notable people on their board of directors as well. Among these were General Albert Cody Wedemeyer, who helped formulate the plans for the invasion of Normandy, and would later go on to be Chiang Kai-shek's chief of staff and commander of all American forces in China during the Chinese Civil War against Mao Zedong's communist forces. Another notable figure on NICAP's early board of directors was Keyhoe's Annapolis classmate Roscoe H. Hillenkotter, who was the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency. NICAP had chapters and local associates scattered throughout the United States. Many of their members were amateurs, but a considerable percentage were professionals, including journalists, military personnel, scientists, and physicians. One of NICAP's prime goals was thorough field investigations of UFO reports. They would eventually compile a significant number of case files and field investigations. In 1958, Donald Keyhoe would have two major media appearances that would bring the UFO subject into the consciousness of many Americans. On January 22, 1958, Keyhoe appeared on a CBS live broadcast television show called The Armstrong Circle Theater to speak on the topic of UFOs. Keyhoe said that a U.S. congressional committee was evaluating evidence that will absolutely prove that the UFOs are machines under intelligent control. However, CBS suddenly stopped the audio portion of the live broadcast once Keyhoe began discussing congressional hearings. Let's listen.
Unknown is defined in the dictionary as not discovered, not identified, not brought to knowledge. Of the scores of private, non-government organizations that are devoted to UFO, possibly the most active and eminent is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena of Washington, D.C. On its board of governors are a number of outstanding citizens. Among them are Vice Admiral R.H. Hillenkoetter, former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, Rear Admiral H.B. Knowles, U.S. Navy retired, Major Dewey Fournay, Jr., former Air Force UFO investigator. Its director is Major Donald E. Keyhoe, Annapolis graduate and a former Marine Corps pilot, author of Flying Saucers from Outer Space. Well, Major, you've seen our report on the Air Force conclusions dealing with the current UFO sightings. They've narrowed the unknowns down to 1.9%. How do you feel about that figure?
Well, even if you accept that figure, Mr. Edwards, there's one thing you have to remember. It covers only the last 2 months of sightings. Actually, the figure for all unknowns since 1947, using official Air Force statistics, is over 12%. Now, that is based on this official Air Force record known as Project Blue Book and tables which you will find showing various percentages over the years. Out of the 6,000 cases investigated by the Air Force, 700 still remain unknown. It comes down to this. It is presented fully and accurately. The National Investigations Committee hopes that this will be done promptly. And now, Mr. Edwards, I would like to make a disclosure, something which has never been revealed to the public. For the last 6 months, our committee has been working with a Senate committee which is investigating official secrecy on UFOs. If the hearings are held, open hearings, I feel it will prove beyond doubt that the flying saucers are real. In order to secure the information we suggest that all of the citizens in the district right.
Thank you, Major Keyhoe. One of the most eminent men of science.
This apparent censorship would cause quite a stir at the time, and Donald Keyhoe would use this as an example of the U.S. government's immense interest in the subject, even though the government officially claimed there was nothing to UFOs. On March 8, 1958, Keyhoe appeared on the Mike Wallace interview show on ABC and spoke about flying saucers, contactees, and the details of the Armstrong Circle Theater censorship, which he blamed on the Air Force rather than CBS.
What about that?
I'll answer that, but I'd like to make several points doing it. In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men and scientists under contract, sent a secret document to the Commanding General of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real. In 1948, ATIC, the same group, sent a top secret estimate to the Commanding General, Hoyt Vandenberg, said these were interplanetary spaceships. In 1952, there was an intelligence analysis of the maneuvers of these things, as seen by radar, triangulation, radar photographs, and in 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Air Force had a special panel of scientists meet at the Pentagon to tell them what to do. And after they got through, this group said, you don't have proof that these things exist, not scientific proof, but you have a very strong circumstantial case. We suggest you quadruple the investigation, set up special observation posts, and in the meantime, release everything you've got to the American people.
In 1966, Donald Keyhoe would have one of his final television appearances, appearing as a guest on the CBS game show To Tell the Truth.
This photograph was taken for publicity purposes by the manufacturer of the aircraft. The arrow points to a disc-shaped flying object which was not noticed until the photograph was developed. This is an enlargement of that disc. This object was photographed in the skies off the coast of California by an officer of the SS Ramsey. This is official U.S. Coast Guard photograph number 5554 of unidentified flying objects over the Coast Guard station in Salem, Massachusetts. None of these phenomena has ever been successfully explained. Our first guest on To Tell the Truth is one of the world's leading authorities on unidentified flying objects like these. What is your name, please?
My name is Donald Keyhoe.
My name is Donald Keyhoe.
My name is Donald Keyhoe.
Only one of these gentlemen is the real Donald Keyhoe. The other two are imposters.
Well, panel, these three gentlemen all claim to be Major Donald Keyhoe. Let's start the questioning with Tom Poston. Tom?
Thank you, Bud. One thing that's puzzled me always, number one, has there ever been any photographic, physical evidence of terrestrial disturbance by these UFOs?
Yes, last year in South Africa near Pretoria, one of these objects was seen by local police on a highway, and as they approached it with their police cruiser, it discharged a blast of flame onto the highway and took off at high speed. And when they checked it, they found that the pavement had been, a hole had been broken in the pavement about 6 feet in diameter, and the macadam road was set on fire and blazed for about 3 hours. And this was officially confirmed by the commandant.
That's exactly the kind of thing I mean. Number two, any of these things...
Now, they do come in sort of different shapes and sizes, right?
Most of the sightings describe disc-shaped objects. In fact, the Air Force secret project Grudge report years ago.
Gerald Hurd.
Gerald Hurd is the author of a book, Is Another World Watching?
There was a great concentration of unidentified flying objects over Fort Knox for a while. Do you remember that?
Yes, that was the case in which Captain Thomas Mantell was killed chasing
he's made up,
one of
and
these
his hands don't match his face. And if it was the real one, maybe they wouldn't do that. But on the other hand, he knew everything. And so I had to vote for number one.
Well, that's a round Robin Hood's barn way of getting there, but there it was. In any event, the votes are in and the minds are made up. Let's find out now. Which one of these three gentlemen, in truth, is Major Donald Keyhoe? Will the real Major Donald Keyhoe please stand up? Thank you, sir. Major, let me ask.
By the beginning of the 1970s, Donald Keyhoe was no longer on the NICAP board of directors. He would write a few more books on the subject and speak at UFO conferences, but ultimately began to step away from the subject as a whole as his health began to deteriorate. In 1981, he would join the board of directors for a new civilian UFO research organization, MUFON, but this was largely symbolic, as his health was rapidly getting worse. In 1988, Donald Keyhoe passed away at the age of 91, and he was buried in Green Hill Cemetery in Luray, Virginia. Donald Keyhoe was one of the first prominent ufologists to research and investigate the UFO phenomena. He helped launch the field of ufology that so many people pursue today. His television and radio appearances helped bring UFOs to the attention of many Americans for the first time, and his creation of NICAP helped outline how civilians can properly investigate UFOs and be taken seriously by society. His legacy in the field of ufology and human history in general will be felt for generations to come.